Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our Capital Improvement Plan Town Hall Forum. If you have not had a chance to look over the CIP, you can scan the QR code on the screen or visit westfargond.gov. Today we will give a short presentation and then we'll open it up to questions and input from those of you in attendance, as well as any questions submitted online. Joining me are Commissioner Brad Olson, whose primary portfolio covers street, water, and sewer, City Administrator Tina Fisk, Assistant City Administrator and City Engineer Dustin Scott, and also Public Works Director Matt Anbick, Mr. Jim Larson, Finance. Also in the room, we have Commissioner Jurdevig joining us this afternoon and Commissioner Simmons. Thank you for being here. The purpose of this town hall is to give an overview of the Capital Improvement Plan, the process of creating the plan, why we use this type of plan, how projects make it to this plan, and how the plan is funded. Following this public input session, the CIP will be sent back to the Commission to take action on adopting the CIP. Adoption of the CIP, the Community Improvement Plan, does not approve any individual project, but the long-term plan of work. We ask that you all join us in taking this high-level consideration of the CIP today. Rather than focusing on any one project, we ask you to consider how the CIP lays out a 5-year plan to maintain, improve, and grow our city. Once again, please feel free to scan the code or find the engineering page at westfargond.gov to take a look at the plan as we discuss it today. With that, I will turn it over to our Assistant City Administrator, Dustin Scott.
Well, thank you, Bernie. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending, and excited to go through our capital improvement plan. This is our third opportunity presenting the plan here. So I hope, again, after our short little presentation, you answer or ask all the questions you have, and hopefully we can find the answers for you. So, a little overview. Our capital improvement plan is really a tool for planning long-term infrastructure and maintenance projects for the city of West Fargo. The CIP is a living document, and projects can be added or removed at any stage. Each project is presented before the City Commission multiple times throughout its cycle and follows the standard practices and policies for review and authorization. As we've mentioned, the adoption of the CIP does not approve any individual project. Adopting the CIP really allows staff to begin the process for scoping and studying projects to provide additional information to the City Commission before they move forward. Capital improvement plans are a standard practice for city governments to make long-term plans and policy decisions. The CIP provides guidance to staff and commission on long-term budget decisions and long-term project management. The graph you see here on the screen shows how the capital budget over the next 5 years is distributed amongst types of projects. You can see that our highest area of spending is street projects, followed by buildings, which includes the new fire station. These numbers are constantly changing as we adjust to more accurate project costs through the project life cycle, and of course, through the volatility of our markets. And as we understand today globally, there are certainly events that can also have an effect on our forecasting of these projects. Our capital improvement plan is foremost focused on maintenance of existing infrastructure and then the addition of new infrastructure as the city develops and grows. It is important to note that when a new neighborhood is developed, the street and utility infrastructure is included into the CIP. The CIP follows the City Commission's guiding principles on financial policy that was adopted in 2021. The primary goal is to reduce special assessments for all infrastructure types. After applying a percentage of city funds, as shown in the chart, the remaining will be funded through other sources, outside funding, utility fees, and special assessments, to name a few. The proposed CIP has been created to keep specials as low as possible while completing necessary projects and new development. Over the next 5 years, 28% of project costs are funded through specials. This does not mean that each project is 28% funded by specials or that all residents will be assessed at a 20% increase. Really, what we are forecasting right now based on the parameters that we've set forward in the CIP, 28% of all those projects are anticipated to be funded through special assessments. So to continue on funding, the chart you see here shows where all of the funding will come from for the capital improvement projects over the next 5 years. And city staff will work diligently to seek outside funding where possible through grants and contributions from state and federal agencies, as well as local partners to cost share in projects. So how can you, the residents, stay informed? Residents can follow the life of a project through city commission meetings. All projects will be presented multiple times before the commission during their regular scheduled meetings. Agendas and meeting information are always available on our website. Project information will be available online by the time a project is in the study design phase. And you can utilize the project status here showing to follow a project through its life cycle, and then be aware of a project that is in the NS category, not started. And a project that has not been started will not have detailed information. So as we progress through, as a project matures, more information becomes available. That information is then disseminated through outreach on our website, or again, certainly through the public meetings that the City Commission holds. So again, that was a brief overview of the capital improvement plan that was presented on March 10th and March 21st. Really, the intent today is to have more of a town hall setting where we can engage the audience into a question and answer session. So at this point, I will turn it back over to our Commission President, Bernie Dardis, to start that question and answering session.
Thank you, Dustin. In the analysis and development of the CIP plan, much of the information does come from our department heads, but it also comes from the public. If you've raised concerns about your particular street or the settling around a manhole cover, that data is always being collected and brought to the specific department that it's required. So sometimes when you see what's developing on these CIP programs, for example, every year we have one where we do concrete repairs throughout the city. A lot of that data has been gathered from you, from the public, and we appreciate that very much. So that's just an understanding here. This isn't just developed, if Commissioner Jurdevig or Commissioner Simmons, Commissioner Olson, myself, Commissioner George, if we're constantly getting complaints about a certain area, then we raise that awareness to the department heads. But this is an accumulating of data that's constantly coming into the city requesting that we take a look at this. It's interesting. In the last year, I've had a phone call telling me that we don't have enough streetlights in a particular area. In that same particular area, I've had a neighbor call me and tell me the lights are too bright. So, it's an ongoing dialogue of people's wishes and what they believe West Fargo services should be. So with that said, Commissioner, you have anything else?
Nope.
We're going to open it up to questions, and do we have anything online?
We don't have any questions being submitted online during this meeting, but we did have a few questions that were submitted prior to the meeting that we
Okay.
could start off with if you'd like.
Well, I'm going to be respectful of people's time, so if there's someone here in the audience that would like to speak, please raise your hand. Melissa will walk the microphone out to you, and we'll do our very best to answer your questions and our concerns. Who's going to be first? We've got a great audience here. I'm extremely pleased being it's 12 o'clock.
Just go ahead and state your name and ask.
All right, so I'm Robin Anderson. I have a few questions, but I'm just wondering, it seems like the core area has been kind of pushed back, and I know the core area is an important issue. When it comes to the core area projects, is there any work or discussions with other companies like Excel to align projects so we don't end up with multiple years of streets being torn up? And then in addition to that, what's being done for maintenance south of the interstate so that area doesn't end up like the core area?
Mr. Scott.
Certainly. Well, thank you, Mr. Anderson, for those questions. We'll start with the core area concern. Yes, so the city adopted the core area plan back in 2019, and in that time since adopting that, we have completed the downtown Cheyenne Street project, of course, that finished up last fall. There are a handful of other projects that we are actively working on. The preliminary and studying phase, the two bigger projects, we are seeking funding opportunities. One is a nationally competitive grant. We're also seeking additional funds through state programs that are available, and those things take time. Like mentioned earlier in the overview here, we are doing our best effort to try to keep special assessments low. And so to do so, we have to pursue outside funding sources, and again, even though there were a handful of projects that were slated to start construction in 2021 or 2020 even, some of those projects have been on hold while we work through, again, some of the preliminary and study phasing, but more importantly, seeking additional funds. Of course, I think last year there were a couple water main breaks in the core area that Public Works had to go over and deal with on an individual basis. Public Works will continue to monitor and deal with those as needed, but we have certainly not lost sight of the core area plan, and we are, like I said, working on a handful of those projects as we speak. Does that answer the first part of the question? Yep. As far as the maintenance on the south side, again, we have a pretty, maybe this is more appropriately answered by Matt from Public Works, but our standard maintenance includes things like pothole repairs and so on and so forth to try to maintain and keep service life up for our infrastructure. But I'll probably turn that over to Matt to be a little more specific.
Okay, for that, I guess Dustin and myself have been talking, and along with our traffic engineer, Andrew Rucky, it's just to get a maintenance or maybe just a scheduled pavement maintenance plan going with the city to be able to do that. Like you mentioned, the one south of the interstate, you start looking at that, and a lot of people think those are new streets. It's a newer part of town, but you start looking, they're 15, 20 years old already, and now we have to start seeing, okay, what can we do to make those last for another 15 or 20 years? And that's part of the CIP is we're looking at different pavement maintenance projects to do that. One of the trick that we're trying to do is where are our guidelines, right? What are our guidelines, and what are the streets that we're going to do with those projects? Because we don't want to get into the point where, okay, we're going to do this street and it's a lower special assessment or not special assessed at all to do some kind of maintenance on this street, but the next street over has to be completely reconstructed, and that is now a higher special assessment. So we have to make sure that we have our guidelines, so we are saying this is the reason why this street is being done and why that street is not. And that's just kind of it's not just a West Fargo issue, it's kind of in general over the entire country getting to this point. But to more get back to your your point is we are working on that plan to do that so we can make those streets last longer. And like Dustin said, we're very aware of the special assessment areas, and going down a lot of those areas in town still have quite high special assessments. We really don't want to have to go down there and tack on more to fix their street when they're saying, well, I just paid for it and it shouldn't be like this. So that's the trick we're trying to figure out, and that's kind of where these projects in the CIP are, where we're trying to find that and fund that through. So it's kind of a work in progress right now, but it's kind of one of the main priorities that we're working on. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Acceptable, Mr. Anderson? The gentleman behind him has a question in the red.
Yeah, I can stand. Yeah, my name is Jim Kramer, and I have a question. How are these special assessments supposed to be allocated anyway? Per project, per what?
Mr. Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah, so special assessments are allocated certainly per each project. Each project has its own unique boundary that is established, but the city does have a policy, a special assessment policy that was adopted first in 2016 and amended in 2021, just in June of last year. And so the city really follows that policy along with the guidelines set forth in the North Dakota Century Code for creating a special assessment district, which again is a unique boundary specific to that project type and who's benefiting from those improvements. Then the allocations are, again, in accordance with that policy. Sometimes it's on a front foot or square foot basis, but the project costs are then allocated to that boundary that was created at the beginning of the project. So there is a special assessment commission that reviews at the end of the project, that reviews final costs and the proposed allocation methods. But again, those guiding principles are really set forth in the special assessment policy that is available on our website.
One of the things that's a little different from our CIP that we have presently, you know, this method of planning has been used for years within our community and across the state of North Dakota. But if you'll notice that on about the second or third page, there is a certain percentage that has been allocated of what our revenue source out of tax dollars will be spent on these projects. And that's unique and that's new. It used to be clear down to 20%. We're going to go now, we're going to go to 40%, and we're going to try and keep all special assessments never coming over greater than a 28%. So this planning process that has taken place, okay? Again, input from the public, input from our department heads, input from the commissioners has now been all intertwined. But the key note here is that we are taking the amount down on special assessments. That's it. That's the one thing that we have heard for years, I'm sure, but certainly during the last 4 years, as to one of the things that we have to get a handle on and manage it. So because of institutional knowledge of knowing what those revenue sources are from our sales tax collections and what we get from the state and all of those types of things, that's all been entered into this, okay? So what we're trying to do is that that a special assessment to any of the public will never be over 28% of the project. And that's why when we talk about the CIP and you see all these line item listings on here, our intent is that's for budgeting purposes. Again, we have a historical information of what our tax collections have been and what approximately will, you know, we forecast, I suppose, about a 1.5% to 3% growth, which we know it's been greater than that when as far as what our revenues are. So that's the numbers that we're plugging in to try and make this as close a budget as we possibly can. Again, we're spending more time, more scrutiny on that type of thing than we have in years past. Next question, please.
I probably don't need that mic. I have a question. Steve Markworth. I have a question regarding the special in Charleswood, that doesn't matter, it's either here or there. And I was actually at a city commission meeting, how the project at 9th Street and 13th Avenue and Cheyenne, the people who live in Charleswood got a double whammy for those. Two of the city commissioners at that time voted against that, didn't think it was a great idea, it got shot down. How in a situation like that are you gonna say, wait a minute, and my theory on that is Cheyenne, 13th Avenue, 9th Street are major artillery routes. Those routes, whatever the case may be, should probably be taken care of as a city as a whole, or everyone should be hit for it. Rather than saying, wait a minute, these people in this area got a double whammy.
Thank you, Mr. Marquardt. You raise a great point. In the 9th Street, the 13th Avenue, and then Cheyenne Street, depending upon what your block was in that dynamic between the north-south Cheyenne and 9th Street. You raise a great point. The one thing that I wanted to tell everybody here is that there are very limited things that we can do a special citywide assessment on. You can do it for you could do a city water treatment plant or something like that. No? Mrs. Fisk, then I misunderstood.
Sorry to interrupt, President Jarvis. In North Dakota Century Code, it's illegal to do citywide assessment. So there's never an opportunity.
I thought you could for water
allocate a
treatment.
project citywide. You can have
Utility
large
bills.
districts like we did with some
Through the
projects,
utility bill,
but
probably.
that's the limit. It has to be the benefit area. You can't choose your whole community. On large projects like President Jarvis was talking about water towers and other water sewer things, should be managed through rates. We can also put city sales tax into that to help fund the cost and keep the rate increases down if we have to do that. There's a multitude of ways, but not citywide assessments.
So in our special assessment policy that we've developed, Mr. Scott, would you address Mr. Marquardt's question specifically of how some of the addendums to that policy is that takes away the concerns that he has?
Absolutely, yep, and again, great point. I know, yep, there were certainly a couple commissioners in my office that were really pushing forward to reevaluate how we've spread arterial roads in the past. And one of the ideas was to designate, basically map the city and designate an arterial road, an east-west and a north-south to a geographical area, and try to keep consistently applying those boundaries for all future projects. We started working into that and certainly can apply those as future arterials come forward. We do have some challenges when it comes to some of those things with just the geographical shape of our city. But again, one of the guiding principles that were adopted last fall in 2021 was to make every effort to keep special assessments low. And I hope there comes a day where we don't have to use them at all. But, at this point, it is one of the financial tools that we have and rely upon. And so all I could offer is that our assessment policy does allow us that flexibility per project. And we have the ability to come in there and change if we ever do get to that point where we've been able to map out and designate an arterial road to one neighborhood and another to another. We will certainly continue to work towards that so that we do have consistencies and equitability throughout the city. And beyond that, again, all I could say is our directive from the City Commission at this point is to do everything we can to keep special assessments low.
Jody Malou. I'd like to write down exactly the website that we need to go to, that we can see the wording for the changes that you're proposing to the special assessments. I showed one of the commissions, I think it was Planning and Zoning once before, some wording in the Century Code before that explained that special assessments have not always been used by the city of West Fargo the way that the Century Code shows. I don't own any property here in West Fargo, so this is not for me specifically. It's for all the people who live here. But we need that URL so people can go there and read exactly what the proposed changes are. Thank you.
Thank you. Melissa, can you,
Do this before we leave, so that we don't have to go home and try to figure out the website. Because the website, and I've written a letter, was asked to make suggestions as to how the website could be changed so that we could actually use it as people who live here or people who work here, like I do for my boss. But I can't make my way around the website, even when I have help from people who are city employees working with me at the same time looking, they can't find it either. And I spent a lot of time on that letter, and I sent that 2 years ago, and no one's replied. Thank you.
Ms. Richard, would you address that for us, please?
Sure. If you go on westfargond.gov, right on the homepage, in the middle of the page, there's a search bar, and you can type special assessments policy right into that search bar, and it will take you to the special assessments page. And on that page, there is a link for the special assessment policy that the city has right now. There has not been put forward, the changes that you're talking about, I'm not sure what that specifically references. I think there's the change that will give you the most updated one that we have in place right now. I don't know if Dustin, you want to put a finer point on what you referenced. I don't want to speak out of turn on that, but if you, right in the middle of the page, there's the search bar. If you type in special assessment policy, it will get you to that page.
Thank you. And one other follow-up question of what this lady just gave us. Who is a human being and a phone number where we can actually call if we can't understand it?
Understand the,
Understand what we're reading there as a special assessment proposal.
you can, I'll let Dustin handle that question as well.
Yeah, certainly I would, and Bernie just volunteered another name. I was going to volunteer myself, certainly as, if you're trying to understand wording in the special assessment policy, and then Bernie also mentioned our finance director, Jim Larson, when it comes to some financial aspects of the CIP. So, and Jim Larson is sitting at the other table over here with Matt, but certainly take down my contact information, and then again, our finance director, Jim Larson.
I just want to make a comment
Please.
that
Commissioner Olson.
I don't think that under our CIP that we're proposing to make any changes to our special assessment process. What we've identified on here is that of the projects we've listed in the next 5 years, 28% of the funding to complete those projects will be through special assessments. That's what the city staff has identified, that we will use 28% of all the funding, you take all of it together, and 28% will come from a special assessment. It doesn't mean that every project's going to be capped at 28%. But of the total, let's just say there's $100 million, 28%, 28 million would come from special assessments through however we do it. That's just an example. Doesn't mean that we're going to do it that way, but that's how we've projected our funding. So there's no real change in how we're going to implement special assessments. It's just that of the projects we have identified over the next 5 years, 28% of the funds used to pay for them could come from special assessments.
Next question, please. Anyone?
I have another question here, something that's on this handout you have. Steve Markwart, once again, is my name. It says, future revenues will be calculated with the assumption that utility rates will increase annually to meet capital improvement expenses. Okay, I kind of question some of the things that are here as I look at what we're looking to do. And in 2022, a process here that's obviously not started, it talks about a new paving machine.
So that should have been.
Is the city in the process of buying a new paving machine?
Yes, sir. We have paving machines now, very small ones, but Mr. Anvick.
To answer that question, that goes back to the previous one about the pavement maintenance. That was part of a project that we had listed in the CIP as if the CIP was approved, we would move forward with trying to do that and come back to the commission with it as well, is to purchase a paving machine through the CIP funds for the sole purpose of doing smaller rehabilitation ones with the street department doing it. We did a kind of a pilot study last year when we rented a paving machine. And we did 2 roads in town, and from what we could do those for and what we would have paid a contractor, it was a difference of about $70,000. So that's something that we're looking forward to is in our pavement maintenance plan is to, one, use the CIP funds to purchase that machine, and then the rest of the funds in kind of an annual allocation to do the paving for different areas if we're in the core area or the different streets that have that fit the criteria that we're talking about, is to go in there instead of having to do, full rehabilitations in these areas. If we can get by and just kind of do a mill and overlay with our crews for, say, about 4 or 5 streets a year or something like that to keep extend the life of those streets probably another 15 years instead of having to do rehabilitation probably on maybe even some of the newer streets, instead of to just extend the life of the streets we have instead of just going back and saying, okay, well, the street shot, we're just going to do whole total rehabilitation and special assess it. See, that's the whole process. What we're trying to do is get away from that. I guess I don't.
And yeah, just maybe to add back to some of the points we made early on is that each of these projects in the CIP still need to come before the city commission to get their approval before they move forward. So just because they are identified in the CIP, that doesn't give them the authorization to move forward. So maybe the more specific answer is no, we have not started the effort to purchase the equipment, but it is identified as a 2022 project. After adopting the CIP, it's possible that project will move forward. But again, as I stated in one of the first slides, the projects can be removed, can be added, but specifically to answer your question, Mr. Marquardt, we have not really started this project aside from the planning and scoping phase. And I do want to remind everybody that when you're looking at that list of projects, there is this code that you see here on the screen, and you'll see that there's a not started category, preliminary and or scoping, study and or design. As a project matures, it comes down this list, and that's when more information is available. So for example, we have that particular pavement management project identified, but we really haven't progressed too far into this category here where we're in, I believe that one is listed as either not started or it's in the preliminary and or scoping phase. It hasn't hit the city commission yet, so it's possible we move that forward in 2022. It's also possible that slides back.
Matt, you said $70,000. Did we save $70,000 or it cost us $70,000? A difference of $70,000.
Right. I guess it's all how you want to look at it. If we don't spend the money, we don't save it, right? I think it cost us about, I want to say $26,000 to pave that. And the quote we got from a contractor was around $90,000, $92,000. So, and that's a difference of can we do that and within a maintenance plan and not special assess that to the homeowners? Or do we just say, no, we're not going to spend the money up front and just assess it to the homeowners and say, yeah, we'll just pay a contractor $90,000 to do it. So when we're looking at this and it's a core area or anything like that, is we're trying to look ahead to ways to keep our roads in good repair, but also not put that, I guess, that tax burden or whatever back on the homeowners to do that in those certain areas.
We have a question here.
Thank you. First, thank you for holding the meeting here, Commissioners. Question for you. I had requested back March 21st, Mayor, a detailed copy of this plan. This is a 13-page plan for $185 million. Is there a more detailed copy of this plan available that gives us a better breakdown of these numbers?
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt.
So strategically, the commission has, yes, there is a lot of detail that is out there, but as we talked about earlier, there's a lot of volatility with these numbers. There's a lot of things that happen. Right now there's a war going on. But there are a lot of things that can happen that can greatly impact some of the financial data here. And so project-specific information, especially when you refer to this chart that I have on the screen, if a project has not been started, if it's in a preliminary or scoping phase, even in the study and or design phase, there is still a lot that can develop and change.
Mr. Scott, if I could please, is there a more detailed copy of the information that is presented here? For example, you have $46 million in buildings. You don't tell us what those building costs are going to be. So, can you give us a breakdown that says this building is estimated at this much, at that much? Do you have that available, yes or no?
At this point, Mr. Schmidt, if we provide, let me answer it this way.
Can you just answer yes or no? Do you have a more detailed copy available?
We have what was put together a few months ago to develop those costs, and that's where this, again, is a dynamic document.
Thank you. Is that available to the public?
And that's where I said that at this point, the commission has not made that available to the public.
Why not?
What is available to the public is the capital improvement plan that was available online. Now, if the commission wants to provide more information, that's why we're here. And that's where I would turn it over to either the Commissioner President Dardis.
Mr. Dardis, I'd request a copy of that document if you could. Second question in here, you have in here that any deficits, you have this twice, any deficits shown in these figures can be covered using existing capital sales tax reserves. Future revenues calculated with the assumption that utility rates will increase annually to meet capital improvement expenses. Do you have an estimate, Mr. Larson, of what your annual increases are going to be in utility rates that were used to make this projections?
We do not have an estimate of utility rates projected in here. We have estimated the amounts that will be used from those funds, but we have not done the completed projections, as we will need to do that as we go along from year to year. There are other factors that come into rate increases than just these projects, so we have not been able to complete it at this time.
So you have no value, you can't say, well, we used the cost of inflation on utility rates or something like that?
I have not.
Okay. Third question, Mayor. When you have almost $46 million in buildings in here, is the commission giving any consideration to putting those votes or those building projects to a vote of the people for approval, much like you do for a school district?
I don't have an answer for that, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you.
We've not even had that discussion to that point. As we said, this is a 5-year plan, a 20-year plan. So there's lots of discussions that in 2026, 2027, with the growth projections that we have right now for staffing, in order to provide services for all of you folks, that we'll need more room. But no, there's not been any numbers applied to that whatsoever. Not by myself. Please.
What would it take to bring those projects, building projects specifically, to a vote of the people so that we have a say in them?
I don't know that question. Anyone here in the room know the question? Answer?
Tina.
Mrs. Fisk.
It would take, when the project is brought forward, this is how I think it would take place, when the projects are brought forward to commission for consideration to move forward, and we get to the point where we finally would have some numbers. At that point, it would be up to the commission to determine what type of funding they would want to do. And for sure, if it was like if there's bonding involved or different things, yes, the commission can choose take it to a vote of the people. In some cases, there's not an alternative, though. I mean, our police department, they're already out of space. They have people that don't have lockers. We have people that don't have space. We don't have enough meeting space for them. There's a million different things that are going on over there, so you want us to give that, if we take that to a vote and the people turn it down, what do they do? I mean, sometimes you just have to trust your elected officials to manage properly, but yes, that would be definitely a commission decision if they wanted to take it to a vote.
Additional questions, sir? All right, thank you.
Sorry, I can't stress enough that each project that you see on the CIP is individually brought before the City Commission to flush out further financial details, the scope of the work, the timing of that work. As a planning tool, we put together this list with the best information that we have at the time we put it together. But it is volatile, it changes, and it changes at the direction of the City Commission on an individual project basis.
When you referenced 2 months ago, 3 months ago, do we have a hard copy of that available to us as commissioners?
Yes, we have with what was put together a couple months ago, we have a list of those individual projects with individual project costs together. And certainly can do as what the commission wants with that.
But they would be basically estimates.
Oh, that's all they are. They are very high-level estimates, and the majority of them, we don't have much data to support or to truly hone in and rely upon those estimates any more than what we can for a 5-year forecasting and planning with that best information available. So what's happened in the past, and I'll just, again, to be upfront with this, what's happened in the past is that you publish information, detailed information too soon, and someone holds on to that, and 2 years later, when the project matures and develops a more detailed scope and an updated estimate, someone comes forward and says, well, 2 years ago, you said my street repaving would be $1 million, and now it's $1.4 million. Who's responsible for this additional $400,000? And that's just the evolution of project information, the volatility of the markets, the supply and demand. There's so much that can change, and that's why strategically this commission has adopted a 13-page CIP that talks more about the philosophy and the policies, again, with some comfort that there has been some planning done with what cost information that we've had available to us. But again, not to publish detailed information that you can't rely on for more than a month or two, honestly, in this particular market.
We've had some bids come in recently to the city, and there is a notation on the bid. This bid is good for 2 weeks. This bid is good for 1 week. This bid is good for 3 weeks. That's the type of volatility that we're experiencing with the supply chain. And not exaggerating whatsoever. We've had some that are literally giving us 1 week to make a decision, and oh, by the way, on June 1st, everything's going up 7, 8, 9, 10%. So the volatility that Dustin speaks to is absolutely correct. This is for a budgeting purpose only. The way we evaluate this, because again, historical information of what our tax collections have been, what our revenues have been, our revenues to expenses on a certain auxiliary enterprise as to what that might be. That's going from by experience, but everything is going up so rapidly, we have to adjust this on a regular basis. So,
It'd be
next,
like planning
please.
for buying a new set of tires for your pickup out there. Today's prices, it may be $1,000. And when you really need them, they're $1,200. And that's what we're dealing with right now. So should you have bought them now and hold them in storage until then? Like the CIP is merely a plan. There are no hard dollars tied to any of these projects. We're laying out what infrastructure we have to maintain. It's just like maintaining a house. You see a crack in the wall, I'm going to have to fix it. Do I need to change the oil on my engine regularly? If I do, yeah, that's an expense I can cope with every day. But if I fail not to, if I forget to do it for months on end, guess what? It's going to cost me a heck of a lot more when I have to replace an entire engine than just do an oil filter and change. So that's what this CIP is laying out. The critical pieces of infrastructure that we have identified through staff being in the manholes, working with the sewer lines, going into the lift stations. They know what all has to be fixed. And we have to maintain that because we don't want to have a failure, because if a lift station fails, guess where all that wastewater is coming? It's coming back into your basement. We can put it off and wait, but then when we do that, and if something would happen, then people are gonna come back at us and say, why didn't you fix that earlier? So we're in a tough, all we're doing is laying out a plan. And like Dustin said, this plan can change from day to day, because maybe today we didn't anticipate a sinkhole on this street, and it appears tomorrow. guess what? We have to shift priorities around. So we can't be held to the CIP as a rigid document. So that's all we're doing, is laying out a plan and where the funding sources could come from.
Thank you.
Lana Rocco here. Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity for us to hear about this. I think probably most of us can completely understand that the funding, the costs are really just so unpredictable. That's quite easy. I think what might be helpful, as I look over those 13 pages, I'm not really sure always why this project is on here. What is the need? What is the issue? As we heard, we've got issues with the fire station. We've got people who need space, et cetera. Even some explanation, short as it might be, about why these are the projects that are the priorities that we should undertake would be very helpful. And maybe that was the question back there too, about what's the more detail behind it. I'm not looking for the detail of the costs or even really the specifics of the project, but the need, so that as a community we can really get a sense that these are the things that as a community we want to take care of, and it will take us to this level when we get that done, and it's going to take a while. There's unknowns. We do them project by project. But I'm feeling a need to know a little more about why these are the projects that are in that plan.
What was the criteria that brought it to that specific year? Okay, thank you very much. Additional questions?
I have a question, I guess, is, I would say most of us, if not all of us, are here for the reason, we understand things need to be fixed and taken care of. The bottom line is where the money come from. And with that in mind, the city of West Fargo has given out a lot of tax abatements. Where projects are out there, or buildings are being built, and those people aren't paying any taxes on those things for 10, 15, 20 years. Is that something that needs to come to a screeching halt? And then with that in mind, are we spending money that we shouldn't? Are we wasting money? Let's put it that way. And one of the things that I just saw, I saw before, but I kind of question it, is that we're now getting $400,000 per year, that lights project. Epic and whatever, and for entertainment and things like that. How is that benefiting all of us as citizens? Is that reducing my tax rate? Is it time to cover our losses and say, guess what, guys, if you can't live on your own, once again, I have to make sure I can pay my taxes. I have to make sure I pay my water bill and right on down the line. I only have so much money in my checkbook, and I think that's where, people are looking and say, wait a minute here. Let's reel in the spending a little bit. You can't be spending money like a bunch of drunken sailors.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Fisk. Excuse me, Commissioner.
There's a number of items there. First of all, incentives. Incentives are used in the city of West Fargo. They're not just thrown out there. There's a but-for test. There's a lot of criteria people have to meet in order to receive an incentive. And the purpose of the incentive is that it brings back to the community. And for example, we just closed 2 TIF districts that were opened up the last 25 years. We closed them and they were only had been open about 18 years. They just brought $16 million extra dollars to our tax base. Now you can say those industrial parks would have otherwise filled in, but I don't believe they would have, and that's the whole purpose for it, is to raise our tax base in something other than just residential. We need to shift our tax burden away from just residential, because residential doesn't pay for itself. We need commercial and industrial that have a bigger bang for the smaller space to help cover those taxes. Now, for sure, had we never done those, your taxes would be higher because that's a lot of tax base. That's one different thing. Are there different incentive programs that maybe shouldn't be used?
Still one.
I don't know. That could be a discussion. Fargo just went through that, and they're delving through what they want to do, what they don't want to do. As far as the lights, the money you're talking about does not pay to Epic. We hired West Fargo Events to manage our properties, to manage our 2 plazas and our parking garage. So we pay them to manage those structures. The purpose of those structures is to bring back to the community. Now you look over there, the property values, the land values of all that surrounding area have jumped dramatically in the commercial land. And those buildings that are around there, you've got tens of millions of dollars of buildings there that are going back to the community, plus the sales tax, the lodging tax, and all the events that are happening. That is a win-win for our community, and we are considered a very, very forward-thinking community out in the public. Now, you might think what we're doing is ridiculous, but you look out beyond even Norfolk Florida, and we're being watched because of those things that we have done. And that's an investment of economic development sales tax dollars. It's not property tax, it's not anything else. It's economic development sales tax, and that's the purpose of it, to economically develop and grow our community, which is what the commission's doing.
Economic development sales tax is coming from sales tax, right?
From everybody that shops in our community, whether they're in the community or outside the community, and we do have a lot of people from outside.
Okay? With that in mind, with the businesses that are at the lights or whatever you want to put down there, for the most part, I would like to know what the revenue is generated from their tax dollars that's actually being spent back into it. Are we collecting $100,000 in tax revenue and spending $400,000?
You mean sales tax? We can't get that. The state tax department will not release individual. You can't even get it by type of
Sector, business sector.
Well, as a business owner myself, I can tell you this, I do fill out tax reports to the state. And so that's probably available that you can, well, anyway, I just think that that's, at $400,000 a year, in 10 years, that's $4 million. In 20 years, obviously, do the numbers. How long is it gonna go on? I think that's a very poor investment of taxpayer dollars.
Thank you, sir. Any additional questions?
Just a-
Mr. Olson has a point.
If you look at the CIP, it does not include any general fund tax money. That's where your property taxes go, is into the general fund. So it does not go to a capital improvement project. Your property taxes go for the streets and all that other stuff. So the CIP does not include general fund money.
Mr. Marquardt, the lady behind you has her hand up.
Well, the frustration is palpable in here. You can touch it. People don't know what they can do to weigh in with their opinions as to how the money is being spent by the city. That's what these two men said over and over again, and other people as well. That's the problem. And it goes right back to what I did 2 years ago when I wrote that long letter explaining. I mean, they asked me. I didn't just volunteer it. I was specifically asked how to redesign the website. And because I had designed a website before, not anything here, but I spent a lot of time on it, which is money, and nobody ever responded. I resent it to at least 3 people. I think Tina was one of them. But I copied Dustin on it and all this because that was what we were working on at the time. But the problem is this. People who live here do not know how they can weigh in on how their tax money is spent, whether it's assessments, special assessment, or it's sales tax or whatever. We don't have a place where we can go for the information on how to have the city listen to us.
Mrs. Fisk?
I believe our finance director, Mr. Larson, has a clarification on the spending for the agreements at the Lights Plaza, PW, MIA Plaza, and parking garage.
What I'd like to clarify is the amount that was spoken in the audience that we're subsidizing at $400,000 a year. That is incorrect. The amount is large. It's $199,000, but it is not $400,000. So just to repeat, the amount that was stated in the audience was $400,000 a year. That is an incorrect number. We do track that, and it's $199,000 for last year, and we're on projections. We're looking to have that reduced. So I cannot support the comment in the audience at 400,000 a year.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Is there anybody else from the audience that has a question, comments?
I would like to just
Please, just at least raise your hand to be acknowledged. Mr. Marquardt.
This is written by Wendy Ruhr, October 26, 2021. And it says, City Commission grant 400,039 to West Fargo Events, which will use the host events at Essentia Health Plaza and the POW MIA Plaza. West Fargo Events will have more money to attract and host events, more concerts and events in 2022 than it did in 2021. And this was written, the West Fargo City Commission unanimously approved this portion of the nonprofit budget at its October 18th meeting. The commission granted 400,039 to West Fargo Events. Okay? The city granted West Fargo Events 246,200 in 2021. Right here. I got it.
Mr. Larson. Mrs. Fisk.
So, Mr. Marquardt, can you also provide what the amount that we receive from the CAMs from these units and also from the lease rentals that would offset those costs directly from the property owners?
That's not in here. I'm asking that question.
That's,
And so that is correct. That part was not covered in that report. So from my position, that's incomplete. It was $199,000 for the year of 2021 that was used for subsidy, and that's a net number. So the gross number there, while not incorrect, it does not tell the complete story.
And then why didn't somebody from the city talk to Wendy Brewer, I guess, and say, hey, look, we should probably make this correct so people understand?
Our responsibility is to provide information, not to write the report. So we leave that to the paper. That's their job, and so we'll leave it with that.
are there any additional questions from the public?
In the 2025 funding project overview, can you tell me if I'm correct if I assume here you have $47.3 million total, and you only have one capital improvement project for building, which is the new City Hall? Can one surmise then that you're estimating that project at $17.1 million?
I'll let, honestly, I don't recall the city hall being in the year 2025, but I'd have to go back and confirm, but if Jim's ready to answer that. Yeah.
Again, as was discussed over and over and over, these are placeholders because you can't, in order to properly plan and be strategic, you have to put it in a way that you feel
And if you take
or
that
or
for
or
what this is, it's 17
and
million.
could happen. Now, buildings,
Assumption.
we don't have any idea. We don't know if we would, if the commissioner would said do something moving forward.
You know, Mayor, it'd be nice if we could get a simple yes or no answer from
Will you
your
let her
staff.
finish, please?
No, I'm trying to ask a simple yes or no answer, Brad. And yes, I'm asking here, can you surmise here that you got $17.1 million for a new city hall in 2025? Just a yes or no answer. Is that a correct assumption? I
No.
don't need a litany of excuses.
Mr. Larson, did you have something to add?
No, that was my response.
What was your response, Jim?
It is not the single item.
So where's the other building in here, in that list of projects?
I do not have that list with me. The purpose was not to go project by project, but to do the overview of the process, which we have responded to.
So there's more projects than are shown on this list. This is right off your website, this CIP.
Our
Right.
CIP reflects 17.1 million in facility projects for that year, yes.
But you don't know if that's just the headquarters.
I put the numbers together, and those are the numbers.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. My name's Chris Mace. I do have a quick question, maybe a point of education for me. How do the projects get put onto the capital improvement plan? And is there a threshold that each project needs to make to get on the capital improvement plan? And is there a way that we could communicate that to the general public to show them how and what threshold each project is going to and gonna be in the future?
Mr. Scott.
Well, thank you for your question, sir. Really, the capital improvement plan it's been around for as long as I've been around, and it's been, you know, years before that. And really, it's just a management document, a list of needs that is either identified. Most of it is identified through Public Works. You know, things like we know we need to go repair some manholes over here. We need to rehab a lift station over there. Specifically, as far as a threshold, there is no threshold. There could be a project that it could be as small as $50,000, and there can be projects that are $50 million. Cheyenne Street from 13th Avenue down to 40th Avenue, that was roughly $67 million. So there is no guiding threshold per se, but there is some guidance in that, you know, our capital improvement plan really tries to focus on the maintenance and rehabilitation of our existing infrastructure, and then, of course, anything that is necessary to accommodate future growth or expansion, so new sewer water streets to support whether it's residential developments or to expand urban arterial roadways. So again, there's really not a threshold per se, but a lot of it is coordination efforts through staff to identify infrastructure needs, and they are, at some point, if they're deemed appropriate, again, as a collaborative effort of staff, we put them into this list so that we can, at a snapshot in time, forecast a rough number of what that would cost, go through this policy that has been presented today to establish a baseline funding parameter to have an idea of how that would impact the city over the next 5 years. And again, as a project is going to move forward, that particular project is brought forward, and the funding, the scoping, and all of that is addressed through multiple city commission meetings.
Mr. Andrick, too.
I was gonna say, don't you also rank them on greatest need? Like, if you look at the streets, like these are the worst ones, these are the, you know, what's more critical, what's not, in different categories?
Yeah, so when it comes to again, as we start evaluating the needs, we start looking at what is critical. So last year, we moved forward with a lift station rehabilitation project. Now, the year before, we said we were going to do, I believe, 6 lift stations that were identified as needing rehabilitation. When we actually brought the project forward, we ended up doing 5 lift stations. The scope changed, the costs changed. We added some force mains, so on and so forth. But to Tina's point, yes, we bring forward the most critical projects, and sometimes that criticalness is also dependent upon when is funding available. So there might be a critical need, but in the effort of obtaining either a grant or some other funding source, we decide to wait until that funding becomes available before we move forward with the project. So again, there's just a number of moving factors here that can impact the CIP, but again, we need to have something to help plan not only our financial dollars, but our workload, our strategic public works maintenance plans. And so again, it's where it can be small, big, but if it's going to use, whether it's our capital infrastructure dollars or if it's going to impact our focus areas and where we're working, they generally will make it onto the CIP. What you will not see on the CIP is a line item called potholing or pothole repair. Some of the general day-to-day maintenance is within the Public Works budget. But again, that's where, again, I just long-winded answer maybe, but to give as much detail as I can, the best thing I can say is that there is really no threshold, and it's really a collaborative effort to identify the needs, evaluate them, and then most importantly, bring individual projects before the commission to decide exactly how they're going to be funded and make sure the scope is vetted through.
Mr. Anvik.
I'll kind of piggyback on what Dustin was saying too, and I think there was a couple other ones as well, saying about what is the criteria of how do we pick these projects, right? What is the, do we have a set criteria where, at this, I guess, point, we're kind of trying to work on that, on getting that set criteria of where we want to be, but that's such a changing thing sometimes. We go through, and I think we had for a pavement, a concrete repair job that we did last year, we went and looked at it last fall saying, okay, well, we're looking pretty good. We're maybe only going to be about 200,000 this year. The way the winter went, we went back out now the spring, our street foreman and our traffic engineer drove around and 15 more panels popped. And now that changes the scope. And do we have a criteria of how bad that panel is going to be to replace it? We don't have it written down, but when you're looking at it and see, okay, how is that going to impact traffic, and how can we, maybe fix the northbound lane of this street this year and not affect the businesses? There's different options that we look at that, but in the end, it's like, how is this going to impact the public, the residents, if we wait 1 year, or should we do it now? Do we add it into a larger project and try and just do one big one, or do we do spot projects? So that's what we're kind of trying to look through, is how do we do that? But then, like Dustin had mentioned, the sanitary or any of the storm sewers, we look at it and say, okay, we're going to replace these 5 manholes in 2 years, and my guys will go look at it, and they can almost see through some of the manholes, and they're like, yeah, no, we can't wait 2 years. This has to be done now, because if these manholes fail, we're basically going to have backup in a quarter part of the town in their basement. So that just went from 2 to 3 years out to we have to do this now. So we have to be fluid with being able to do that. And I think I think you mentioned, having the criteria on the CIP, and I think we can do that. It just, like with the document itself, it just might be a little flexible from year to year. On 1 year, it could be good, and then one street just completely blows up, and all of a sudden now that went from being, it's a 5-year project to 2 years, so that's going to be fluid too. So I know Dustin is trying to get that across, that this is going to be pretty fluid in general, just because the nature of our weather around here, and the ground shifting, the freeze-thaw cycles. Last year was really bad on the roads being dry. It was really popping, and then it got wet, and we didn't get a lot of snow, but when we did, it was kind of a freeze-thaw, and we had a lot of potholes pop up. We went back and, I guess, about 3 weeks ago, fixed a bunch of them, and went right back down that street after the last snow, and it looks like we didn't do anything because there was just more potholes. So we are working on developing that criteria, and we have it somewhat set, but I guess it's kind of a fluid, how we prioritize them is, 1 year it could be a high priority, and the next year it gets flopped with one that even got to be a higher priority because of a failure. So, and then as like Dustin said, the volatility of the market it's hard to say. It's like forecasting the weather 5 years from now. That's kind of what we're trying to do. We're getting a best guess what we can do right now with the information we have. But when we were putting this together 3 months ago, all the costs from 3 months ago are probably up 30% or 25% in certain areas because of the Ukraine started, or Russia started war over there. And you wouldn't think that would affect much, but it affects supply chains all around the world, the way everything is connected. Or if there's a hurricane in Texas, the price of our pipe goes up because of the petroleum down there. Things that seem, that don't like are going to affect us up here actually do in the bottom line. So that's things that we're looking at as well, that sometimes doesn't get out to the general public, but it's one of those things where we're looking at trying to figure out, okay, the cost of this project now went way up. Can we move this around and put it off a year and do a different project where it isn't going to cost us much money? Or if we hold off, is it just going to be more expensive? So there's a lot of things that we do look at.
Anything online? Oh. Yes, ma'am.
One last suggestion. Make sure that you have somebody in for 4 years. Jody Malou. It's been 4 years I've been told that we were working on our website, on the website, and again, I don't own property, it's not for me, I'm looking it up for other people, I can't find the information. And when people are on the phone with me from the city, they can't find it either, and if they can't find it, how can we be expected to find it? I appreciate your long explanation, that really gives us good insight into how you have to micromanage some of these projects. But that isn't the point that I was trying to make earlier. We can't find the information, and we don't know how to weigh in and know what's going on and how decisions have been changed. We're not talking about sub-projects, we're talking about major projects, like this other gentleman was talking about. The other guy left to get was frustrated, or maybe he had to get back to work or something, he's a business owner. So at any rate, if we could have the name of our web manager, web designer, whoever it is, and I offered to do this in the initial email 2 years ago. I'm happy to talk to them, just as a user, and I said this in the email, but no one's bothered, and I resent it again to Tina. I know I copied her, and I think I copied you one or two guys, but the person who originally asked me was some young lady, maybe it was you, I don't remember who. It was you. You remember my email, and I just resent it to you, and I sent you the exact email that I sent you 2 years ago.
Yeah, I do want to mention the level of detail that you're talking about in information does take a lot of time to get up on the website. So what we are possibly talking about is a major investment, which also costs money. And so those are lots of things that get balanced and talked about overall. So it's not just about the design, but it's about the staff time and the hours. And so, but it's great to have you have this conversation here where everyone can hear it. So when I have the conversation elsewhere, there's reinforcement. So thank you.
Mrs. Richard, would you please, you said you had some questions online. Have they been addressed through the nature of some of the questions in the room, or are they something specific we should address?
Most of them are specific project-related requests, and I believe generally, I think Dustin and his team have a plan for responding to them. One was a specific request about street lighting in the neighborhood around Westside Elementary, which I think you've touched on, and Dustin's team is already responding to. Another one was regarding paving alleys, which I think Dustin's team is already also responding to. Potholes was another request that Dustin's team is responding to, I believe. Which also I think these are very standard questions that we get in annually, which is why we would get those. And then the other one was questions about special assessments, which we have talked about at length today. So I believe that we have answered those questions, yes.
Would you forward each of the commissioners a copy of those questions, please?
Absolutely.
And then we'll follow up on them as to which department or which individuals are addressing them. Thank you. Are there any additional questions this afternoon? Anyone at all? Again, on behalf of the City Commission and the City of West Fargo, we'd like to thank you for participating today. I hope that this has answered some of your questions. And in some cases, I'm sure it's created additional questions, and that's fine too. So if there's nothing else for the rest of the day, anyone at all? Again, we thank you for your time.